KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan, liquor license Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I think that's the one thing I didn't write down. I didn't see that one coming. I thought you were going for smiles and cries. I thought you were going for
smiles and cries. I have a few written here, but I feel like that was a good one.
Kyle.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yes. I wrote that down in my notes where I was going to let you talk for a little while and then just say that, but
that would have been actually really funny. Plus, you probably would have scared the hell out of me. Which, I think, did we talk about that last week, or was I talking about that with somebody else? That Graydon is doing a thing where he just goes around the house scaring the shit out of everybody.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I tell him, like, dude, do you love me being around? Because you're taking like 1 to 2 years off my life every time you do that to me. And then I feel like I'd rather him do it to Helene and Lilia because I just feel like they're younger and healthier.
That's true.
I should be the last one to have the stress on my heart walls. You know what I mean?
He's going to put you down, you know? Well, it's good to see you, Dig. How's life?
Good to see you. You know what I was thinking about? This is something I haven't talked to you about. My newfound prowess at basketball. You weren't expecting me to say basketball.
No, I wasn't.
You never associate the Digster with basketball. I don't think anybody ever has. It's not my sport. I loved playing it growing up. I used to play with Uncle Mike all the time at the schoolyard by Grandma's house. I always enjoyed the game.
I remember playing with Uncle Mike in it wasn't that schoolyard at Meadowbrook or whatever, but it was like another one that almost seemed Queens-ish. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
It was like in a fenced-in rectangle, and there were like many hoops.
Yes.
You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
That was Albertson Park. That was across in Albertson where Mom grew up, and Uncle Mike. That's across Willis Avenue. You know where Baskin Robbins was.
Right.
On the other side of Willis Avenue, just down a little bit, probably had to be, Albertson is only a square mile, so it had to be at the very edge of like Albertson, northwest edge of Albertson. It was called Albertson Park, I think. And it was really nice. Like you could rent things, like you could rent shuffleboard there. You know, had a couple of little fenced in playgrounds for the kids, had the big expanse for basketball. We used to, early on in skateboarding, we used to skate there actually. We used to skate the benches there. Me and our cousin Brian. But yeah, man, I forgot. It's so crazy. Like I haven't thought about that park probably in a dozen years. You know?
Yeah, I just have a very specific memory of that. I don't know why, but Dig, today's episode of KnockBack is all about Training Day, the 2001 film. I'm excited to talk to you about it because I feel like this movie is really subversive and interesting, and I'm interested to see if you agree or not. But I'm trying to think, is there anything I need to, is that your story for the week?
Well, I was just going to say, we got the basketball hoop. Yeah. I don't know where I was going, what trajectory I was going on, but we got the basketball hoop put in probably about a year ago. Got a pretty nice one. Like everything else with COVID, everything was on back order. As soon as everybody found out they were going to be home, everything's on back order. So we finally got the one we wanted. We put it together. It actually took Helene and I probably a day to put it together. It was ridiculous. It's heavy duty. It's as heavy duty as you could get without actually cementing it into the ground. You know, like one of those, like heavy duty with the weighted bottom and everything. And I was never good at basketball. Graydon's very interested in basketball. He's been playing for a few years. And we said, the only way he's really going to improve is to have without going up to the park or whatever, just to have access, be able to go outside, open the garage door, go shoot hoops whenever you want. And dude, I was never good at basketball, but it's so crazy. We didn't grow up with a basketball hoop. So having one at your disposal, just every time Graydon gets home, go outside for a half hour, just shoot hoops, or after dinner or whatever, just that half hour to an hour a day. Like it's amazing how much better you get at it, and that muscle memory associated with just shooting. And basketball is a hard sport, right? You're basically throwing this thing at a distance, high up, into an opening just large enough for the ball to fit through. It's fucking, when you think about basketball, it's pretty ridiculous, right? That's a difficult sport, and to be consistent And then the athleticism involved, of course, with constantly running, much like soccer and all like other kind of stuff, but just shooting the ball itself. It's amazing having it because I'm actually feeling pretty confident at basketball. Like I get out there, basketball is very humbling because you could be shooting buckets, 7, 8 in a row, and then you just do a complete air ball. There's no rhyme or reason. It's like bowling. You get 3 strikes and then you hit the gutter, type of thing. Right. But I was just thinking about this morning. It's so nice to have it now. We never had one growing up, except for going to the park or whatever. So so that's been for me to feel good at anything that has to do with physical, prowess or sports or athleticism at my age is, Now, if I got onto the court with a bunch of ballers.
Yeah, you go to Planet Fitness or something and play.
It's not going to be. You don't want to it's going to be a bad scene. Even with the best of the suburban set out here, it's not going to be pretty, let alone the city stuff. But what about you? What's going on? What's new with your life? What's going on with you this week? Really,
weekend? Mike, well, the day we're recording this, Micah comes back. She's been gone for a few weeks. She's moving in permanently. So
big things.
Yeah, big things. So I was just I realized this morning I overslept and we recorded a half an hour later than we wanted to because I was like, oh shit, I need to clean the bathroom at the very least. I live a pretty neat life or whatever, but things just get grimy after a while.
Yeah. Oh, dude.
So you got to just kind of like give it a once over. And for some reason, the master bathroom is just the dirtiest room in the house. So I took care of that, but yeah, otherwise just hanging out. And it's funny, man, because you're talking about basketball. I've always had an affinity for basketball too. And you might remember that there were a few years where I really loved it and played a lot.
Yeah.
In high school with a bunch of my friends. And I never played on a team or anything, but I was considered like really good in high school. Like when there would be pickup games and all of that, like I was considered a pretty good player, like to play with the legit dudes and North Bellport and others. And I remember there was this one guy, Steve, I used to play with, who was another white guy. We used to play with mostly black dudes after class at Bellport, and there was this white guy that I used to team up with and a few other guys, and I just had this really specific memory. It's an awesome memory of he was tall. He was like 6'4", 6'5", where I just like lofted a ball up, and it wasn't a dunk or anything, but he just took it and just dropped it in or whatever, and everyone's like, whoa, like all the people were like, and I was like, we're fucking good,
That's a moment of glory.
Yeah, that people are like, why don't you try and play point guard for the team or something? And I'm like, I can't play for the Clippers, man. They're a great team, but
they were good.
The Bellport Clippers, of course, not the Los Angeles Clippers, but yeah. Otherwise, I'm hanging in there, and this kind of brings up something I was thinking about, which was that I feel like I have a natural athleticism still, and Declan, our nephew, who's 15 now, was at my house. We were. And others in the back, Dad was here, were in the backyard, the pool's dug out and whatever. So we were just all like walking in it and dicking around. And suddenly Declan and I just started to doing box jumps out of the pool, and now I fell once and did all, whatever. But like I did 3 at least 5-foot box jumps, and everyone was like, holy shit,
You still got it.
Like, well, they're like, because it's just when I'm 36, I don't do anything.
Right.
I mean, I work out every day, and I was like, yeah, I still got, there's something about, I think what I was realizing is that not everyone has the ability to like just walk up and throw a ball and then swing a bat and kick a ball and jump and run. And I can do, I do all those things pretty competently. I can throw really well. I can catch a football and kick a soccer ball and save a soccer ball and throw a little cross ball around. And
see, that's
so I was thinking about that. Yeah. I was thinking about that recently. I'm like, I'm very cerebral, and I like being inside, and I like being with myself and playing games and all of that and being nerdy, but there is some sort of natural athleticism in me. I have to say there is. And I feel like sometimes I need to touch base with it a little bit more. So.
Yeah, you should. I mean, you should. The fact that you don't have that rust buildup, which I certainly would have. I don't have that level. I never had that level of athleticism outside of skateboarding, which I was just dedicated to, Yeah, the fact that you have that, and you're at that pivotal age too, I feel like, too, where you're in, mid-30s, you could still swing that way, for sure, Take advantage of that. Take advantage of your youth. Your youth.
My youth.
Your youth.
I will. Thank you.
Please.
All right. Well, let's get into the topic at hand, Dig. Training Day.
All right.
2001 film. Oh, yeah, get your notebook, please. Training Day 2001. It was supposed to come out a little earlier in September of 2001. Obviously, something bad happened that month. So it was pushed to October 5th of 2001. And was made for $45 million. It made a little over $100 million. So it wasn't a huge hit. But this movie, I don't know if it's because of when it came out and all of this. I have very vivid memories of seeing this movie in the theater, of buying the DVD, and actually specifically of the ads that were running in the summer of 2001. And I don't know if you remember those. That's where like stuff like, King Kong ain't got nothing on me. But also there was, or, that was the thing, was that like, I feel like there was an edit of that. And people could correct me if I'm wrong, because he says King Kong doesn't have shit on me or whatever. But I think there's like a trailer where it's like, King Kong ain't got nothing on me, or something, something like that. But I could be making that up. But I remember there being a lot of build up and lead up to this. There are some famous actors, including Dre and Snoop Dogg in it. What do you think of Training Day?
Oh man, I mean, we're talking about Denzel, so I'm already excited. You know our love for Denzel. And yeah, man, it's so crazy to think about how close it came out to 9/11. I mean, it was supposed to come out only days after, and they pushed it back. I think the studio might have had a couple of other releases. They talked about an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie coming out at the same time. Is that Collateral Damage? I don't know. But I remember seeing it in the theater too. And with Helene, I remember seeing it here in Pennsylvania. It was, before we got married. And, back then, it seemed like you could really get me in the theater, even if it was like a marquee actor that I wanted to see. Like, it was enough for us to go see a movie in the theater in the early aughts, just because who was starring in it, And I definitely, almost certainly went to go see this because Denzel was in it. I also happened to see, when I was living in LA just a year prior, I happened to see Ethan Hawke in that version of Hamlet. I think it was 2000's Hamlet, a remake, obviously a remake of Hamlet. And I really enjoyed that. And it kind of put Ethan Hawke back on my radar too. So I think maybe a coupling of those two things, I was so interested in it. And just a good solid action movie, but certainly with more substance. But I love this movie. And when it's so funny because you had basically called an audible, right, and said, let's do Training Day. I'm kind of excited about it. Let's slide that one in there. And I said, shit, dude, that's amazing, because I just watched it. I had just watched it 2 weeks prior. It's on Netflix at the moment while we're recording this. And I said, yeah, I just saw it. And of course I watched it again when you said we'll do the episode. And yeah, man, it's a great movie. It's a fun movie. I think it's also kind of a stressful movie. I'll talk about that. And upon rewatching, it's certainly, if you guys haven't seen it out there, go watch, because it's one of those movies where the first time you see it has such a different resonance than the rest of it. You'll want to rewatch it. It's a highly rewatchable movie. But
yeah, I think it's very M. Night. It's very M. Night Shyamalan-esque, and not in that twist or anything, but in the everything in the movie leads to this thing, and you don't realize the usefulness of anything you're being seen or being shown, rather. So you need to. It's a great point. I almost feel like it needs to be watched again in order to get it, like get how much they're showing you. It's actually really cool. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, totally. That build up definitely exists. But yeah, dude, I was excited to do this one. It's a nice topic. It's not like really that iconic, emblematic Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, but it's funny too, just in researching it, a very highly regarded movie in retrospect. A lot of people really love it. And I think initially maybe it was underrated because of the time it came out and everything. So it'll be a fun one. And also I was excited because it's one of those ones that probably a lot of people have just missed that listen to the show. It's not like everybody's seen The Force Awakens. Everybody's played, Horizon Zero Dawn. It's like, this is one that people could go, oh shit, they're doing this. I'm going to go take an opportunity to go watch it. And then you guys could be part of the privy to the discussion. But I'm excited. And also shout out to Dad. Maybe the biggest Denzel fan in our lives.
Yeah, he loves Denzel.
Loves him some Denzel.
Who doesn't really? I don't know. Have we done a Denzel movie yet? I think somehow we haven't.
Somehow, in looking at his filmography, I don't think we've done one yet. This is our maiden voyage. Maybe this will open up, to do more.
He was in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah.
With Tom Hanks. That was the one, the other Denzel movie that was on my mind recently, where I'm like, I don't want to be depressed like that right now, but eventually we'll that movie's awesome.
Oh, dude. So emotional.
Eventually we'll do it. So Training Day, of course, and again, I agree with Dagan. I think most people don't listen to the show without having been familiar with the subject matter, but this is one of those movies, again, where go in blind and then listen to us, because
yeah,
I really, do think it has that M. Night quality.
It definitely does. Yeah.
So again, not in the horror or in the supernatural shit, but just you'll see what I mean when you watch it. And it almost has like a Black Mirror kind of feel to it without technology, like very foreboding. And I wrote in my notes here, and I want to talk to you a little bit about it later, is about like seeing it the first time. I don't quite remember, but like waiting for it to turn. I feel like the first time you see this movie, you're waiting for Denzel to become a good guy. Like you're wondering when it is going to happen, and then it never happens. And I think that's the fascinating part of the film. But of course, it's about a rookie. He's not a rookie cop, but he's a cop that's climbing up, going into he wants to be a narc so he can become a detective, named Jake Hoyt, played by Ethan Hawke. It's worth noting that, and I was a little surprised by this, Hawke got an Academy Award nomination for this movie. Yeah. I actually think his performance in this movie is not great. And okay. I'm curious. Here's my thing about, and I'll just say this at the top. I like Ethan Hawke. I have no problem with him. Obviously classic in like Reality Bites. He's a Generation X icon in acting, no doubt.
Well said.
But I feel like Denzel Washington is so strong that it almost is a one-person movie. Like everyone else is not good enough to be in this movie, really, including Ethan Hawke, I think, where you meet even Scott Glenn plays Roger, right? Not good enough, right? You meet the other four cops, Dre's in there, it's cool, but like they're not that good,
no,
you know? And the wife's not that good. No. And it's just Denzel Washington is just dragging this along. And I almost couldn't help but wonder if Ethan Hawke is just doesn't have the chops, or knew that he needed to almost be as bumbling and background as possible in order to make the movie work. And it somehow does. And yet I still think Denzel and his performance dominates. So let's start there. I mean, what do you think about the performances? Am I off base to say that? I just feel like it's surprising when you see like Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke, who was big at that time, but then it's like, where is everyone else? Like you need some supporting characters that have, you know, like the character of like Scott Glenn is an interesting guy. He's been in a lot of things, but it's not the right actor, right? And then there's these other guys, like the guys that play the detectives and Moreno and all those guys. It's like the only actors that you really meet that are interesting are like Dreamer and Pee-wee and all the guys, like the Spanish thugs later on,
right?
The Hispanic guys. Those guys are pretty good.
Good point.
So yeah, talk to me a little bit about the acting and the performances and what you think. Is my thesis that Denzel is kind of just outshining everyone accurate?
He's so strong. He's so strong in this movie. And of course, you know, he plays this, you know, not only a corrupt police officer, and we'll get much more into his character, but really the prototypical alpha male character where, you know, he's the mentor, he's the seasoned vet. So the fact that he is so strong, he gives this performance. Very rarely, I think, up to this point, has Denzel played a bad guy. So that was also a different turn for him, where he's he's out and out, just an evil, you know, as it turns out. But even from the very beginning, he's a very off-putting, you know, certainly unsavory turning to a straight up insidious guy. But I think it works because everybody else is sort of playing second fiddle. Everybody else is considered meek compared to that one guy who's basically controlling the streets, untethered, unchecked. You know, he's this prototypical alpha male who's throwing his weight around, abusing his authority. But dude, he's so good in it. And of course, Denzel, it's important to say, he won an Oscar for this performance. Ethan Hawke was nominated. I think Ethan Hawke is an interesting guy because he's a polarizing dude, even in Hollywood, because a lot of people don't like him. I think sometimes he comes off very smarmy, holier than thou, seems a little arrogant at times. He has that famous split up with Uma Thurman where apparently he was cheating on her. So I guess that didn't help, you know, his look, his publicity, I guess. But he's an interesting guy. In fact, I listened to a really good movie show on YouTube where one of the hosts notoriously hates Ethan Hawke. So it's really interesting. But yeah, I love what you said about just being him, Ethan Hawke proper, being a Gen X icon. I mean, going back to Dead Poets Society and Reality Bites and other earlier things. I mean, iconic Ethan Hawke, of course, his collaboration with Richard Linklater in all of his projects, sort of a Richard Linklater mainstay. But he does the other thing about Ethan Hawke is besides doing stage, he's considered sort of an artsy actor. It's weird to see him in a more blockbustery film. I mean, this isn't like a a Michael Bay type of film. He gets involved with the franchise later on, actually, when they developed a television series out of this. But it's interesting to see him in a part like this because, you know, he's not usually in a movie that builds this high. So, but I like Ethan Hawke in the performance, and of course we'll get more into his character, but he is playing the younger cop, the young aspiring cop, the protege, you know, the would-be protege to Denzel Washington's, you know, notorious, legendary LAPD narcotics officer. So I like the way it works. It's interesting that you say about the cast as a whole, though, because there isn't a lot of strength in this. I do like the casting of the three wise men. We don't see them a lot. Of course, we'll get to their scene. Tom Berenger is one of those guys. Pretty strong. And I love what you said about the Mexican gang. There are some strong actors in that. I think all three of the main dudes are actually pretty strong. But besides that, like, you even think of like Alonzo's mistress's little kid. Like, that kid is just a terrible actor. You know, there's just like some kid. There's some casting in the movie that's suspect, but I think it works only to make Denzel's performance, you know, even put it up higher, even make it even more magnetic and more powerful. But you know, it's interesting too, Kyle. Like, you could have gone so many ways with the casting throughout the entire movie. Not only is the movie so tightly paced, I think it's a reason why it's so entertaining and so rewatchable. But you almost feel like a lot of the movie, a lot of the detail of the movie was maybe cut away, ended up on the cutting room floor because it's very tightly paced. So a lot of it happens to center around Denzel's character rather than the little side story about, you know, talking about like he has a wife and four boys. And then you see you really don't ever get a taste of that. You never really get a taste of Ethan Hawke's home life or get a lot of background for him. You get even very little of Denzel's mistress, as it turns out, the three wise men, what else is happening in this thing. So a lot of it is just concentrated on Alonzo's character. So therefore, you don't even get a chance to see a lot of other stuff, which is, you know, makes Denzel and his character and his performance shine all the more. It's really kind of centered and anchored around the character. And, you know, the other thing too is that, again, guys, like watching it that first time, what everything Colin said, you're really holding out hope for Ethan Hawke's character that Alonzo is going to turn out to be on the up and up. You know, you're really rooting for Ethan Hawke's character, even though from the very beginning it doesn't look good. Denzel Washington's character almost gives like this fatherly performance where he's in one part reprimanding and one part praising, and you're like, all right, maybe it's just like a tough love type thing where it's going to come out that he's basically vetting, you know, this young cop to see if he could take it. And apparently maybe 3/4 of the way in, you'll find out like, okay, like he passed the test type of thing. We're almost being fooled just like the Jake Hoyt character.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. I think we're some sort of proxy for him. And it is really interesting. It is very sadistic. I'm glad you brought up pacing because Rubinos wrote into us on Patreon about that. And he says, personally, I think it's a textbook example of a no time wasted film.
None.
Because the story fits within a single day and the mounting tension and intrigue never wanes until the climactic finale. Seems like movies that constrain themselves to a short window of time within the story tend to have great pacing as a result. Another example being Ice Cube's Friday. Training Day for me will be infinitely rewatchable in large part due to this great pacing. Yeah, I totally agree. It was interesting to read about how they even wanted to cut some other stuff out of the film. I would be curious. The three wise men scene, for instance, apparently was going to be cut entirely, which you lose all sorts of context. I'm glad that they didn't do that, but I do wonder like what else was there, because there's also, you only ever get also one line from anyone about Alonzo while Alonzo is not there. And it's actually a line from one of the gangsters in that neighborhood that ends up turning on him later on, and you realize that it's foreshadowing. But there's a lot of interesting stuff where the pacing goes so quickly that it never even marinates on a scene long enough for you to see like what happens when he leaves a place or what people say or think about him, you know? So I am fascinated by that. But I do wonder, well, let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
The scene with Ethan Hawke and his wife, we only see the wife and child once in the beginning. Obviously, you start wondering if these two are going to get killed at some point. That ends up not happening, as far as we know, thankfully. But it's interesting. I do love that first scene where he's staring at the clock and then the alarm goes off and he immediately hits it. I love that scene. I think it's a great shot.
Great storytelling shot.
But then I'm a little confused. Like, what was it? Was it a turn of the century kind of thing, or like, a little bit of sex in there or whatever, where it's like, the wife is breastfeeding when he's getting up, and so I just feel like it's a little strange. I don't know what they're trying to do, but I do like that we get a little bit of time with the family. The one thing I did notice, and I started writing this down in my notes, were all the different trappings of late 90s, early 2000s fashion, and the wife in the kitchen is wearing, I think it's Enichi.
Yeah.
I used to say E-Nice, but it's not how you say it. E-N-Y-C-E.
Remember that brand?
That was a brand. That was huge. That brand was huge when I was in high school. And just seeing that shirt, such a doofy little shirt with like a football on it, I'm like, man, what were people doing? But it's always that way. And so what did you think about that kind of beginning scene, especially with the phone call, when he gets the phone call and he gets hung up on and all of that? She's the one telling him not to blow it too. So
yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And that's where I feel like they could have even given us a little more, or maybe, perhaps a little bit ended up on the cutting room floor. But it starts with giving a little background into this young cop character. Maybe he's a rookie cop. Maybe he's just a young cop, relatively new to the force. We know he's extremely ambitious. We know he's wide-eyed, starry-eyed, full of wonder. He's one of those guys that's really dedicated to moving up in the force. And sounds like I'm talking about Star Wars. But I love that little beat with where, just staring at the alarm clock, waiting for it to, turn 5, because 5 o'clock, so he could hit the button when it pops. And, it's like that whole thing of like, he's ready to start his day. He's ambitious. He's ready to get out there. He's gung ho. And it's funny too, something I didn't think about with the character until watching it this last time. He's also talking about with his wife, like, oh man, I can't wait to make the grade and make detective. Like, you got to see these guys' houses and stuff like that. Like, I wonder how much of it is pressure from the wife. I wonder how much of it is just a materialistic type of thing. It's not, and that's not to dehumanize the character. I'm sure he wants to be a good cop, but there's other aspirations there too, besides being a crime fighter. You know what I mean? It's wanting to move up in the world, get a better paycheck, that whole thing. So they reveal a little bit about that. Later on, I love the little football touch with the Nietzsche shirt or whatever. Like, later on, you find out like he's a star football player from North Hollywood, high school football player. And the Roger character knows that about him. I figure with this character, he probably has a military background. He just seems that, clean cut by the book. A lot of police are, of course, have a military background. I just kind of get that intonation from the character a little bit. But I love the beginning. We get a little bit of texture into the character, and the fact that, he wants to, this young cop really wants to get out there. He wants to see what it's going to take to move up in the world, become a narc, and by way of narc, become detective. And, he's just, he's full of hope, and he's full of wonder, and he wants to see how it works and everything like that. And this character who he's going to meet, who becomes his, mentor over the course of this single 24-hour period, is going to take, what's going to transpire to completely take the wind out of this guy's sails and turn that hope into complete dejectedness, and, really open his eyes up to the way it really works, the way the LAPD really works, the inner workings, the corruption, all the things that, he doesn't know about yet, that he's going to be educated. He's going to have this education over this 24-hour period. That's like pretty heartbreaking, actually. You see this cop who wants to not only do right, he shows that, but he hopes for this station in life, but also just wants to do right, just wants to be a good cop, just wants to be part of the the good guys, take out some arch criminals and all that kind of thing. And he's going to learn it's just not going to go that way for him.
Yeah, it is a sad movie in some way. Like, it's crazy. We don't often, it's not very uncommon, but we don't get movies typically that are just one day. And what I couldn't stop thinking about that, in the sense of the movie starts at 5, and it ends in the late evening, early morning, I think, when he walks home. So it's about 24 hours, but like, it's interesting, in a 2-hour film, you're seeing like 1 in 12 minutes of his day. Like, you don't really, there's nothing missing. And when you really get down to it, like, there's a lot of time missing too. Like, they're just driving from point A to point B. He's passed out in the car at one point. Like, these are just shaving hours off. So you're seeing much of what happened to him that day. And it's a day unlike any other. I think it's scary. The movie's kind of harrowing.
Definitely.
about how a person can get so thoroughly taken advantage of and used by someone else. There's that really sad scene. I wrote down the quote because I wanted to make sure I got it. Oh yeah, Ethan says, "You've been planning this all day," and Denzel says, "I've been planning this all week, son." You know, and it's like a really dark thing. They found a mark, and they were gonna destroy this guy. They were planning on destroying Ethan Hawke, you know, on Hoyt in order to save themselves.
Yeah.
Specifically in order for Denzel to be able to pay the Russians off for some mysterious, you know, murder that happened or whatever in Vegas. So it is very sad. I mean, that is a psychotic person you're dealing with. That is basically, he doesn't know you. He finds you, he marks you, and then figures out this entire manipulative thing that can happen in order to tank you, if necessary. It seems like maybe he could have gotten out of that scene specifically at Roger's house after Roger's killed. He probably could have gotten out at that point and gotten away with it.
Yeah.
But he would have been one of them at that point.
Exactly.
And he would have been, see what I was realizing, and even with the Three Wise Men scene and just the way that the cops interact with each other in the narc section of whatever, you know, their narc unit, is they all seem to be captured. That there seems to be, it's like an asteroid being captured by, or, you know, by a moon or a planet sucking it in towards it. It's like everyone is in and has their tethers into each other, and one person goes down and everyone gets screwed. And you can see that they're really frightened about that. That's why I think the Three Wise Men scene is so vital, because these guys are like, you better fix this. Like, we can't. It's like a DA and, like, you know, a detective and like the internal guy and all that. And they're like, you can't. These guys are crazy. And you know what? One of the crazy things that I forgot to bring, I mean, this should have been brought up at the beginning, is the context in which this movie is written, filmed, and released is different than it is today. Now, today we're recording this in 2021. Obviously, a lot has happened with police brutality and all that. I understand. But in the 90s, people have to understand that Los Angeles was lost for 4 days during a riot because of the Rodney King situation specifically, which is in 92, I think. It's night and day. The LAPD have a horrible reputation.
Yes.
And it's later why, like, OJ gets off and all that kind of stuff. Everyone knows, like, this was like, you know, to stick it to the LAPD, even though it's clearly a murder. And they're a notorious group to this day. They're considered by many lawless, and certainly at this time they were completely corrupt in many ways. So I also think it's important to put that context in there as well. This movie is released less than 10 years after the riot, fewer than 10 years from Rodney King, 6 years after OJ gets off, and all of the rest. So there's a lot there. So what do you think about that context as well, about policing? And I feel like Training Day almost wouldn't work today, because, and it almost wouldn't work in any other place. I feel like you couldn't do Training Day in Milwaukee or something. I just don't, you know, or Houston even. I feel like it has to be Los Angeles. So what do you think of that whole police culture in LA?
Oh, it's so meaningful, just in real life in our United States, to anchor it to the LAPD specifically. And it's interesting that you bring all this up, Carl, because I don't know if you realize Antoine Fuqua, who directed the film, has a prequel in development right now, I guess dating back a couple of years, where they want to show the Alonzo character about 10 years prior. So in 92, they said that it's going to center around him being a younger man just before the Rodney King verdict and days before the LA riots, which is really interesting, because you want to see, you could think about how this character kind of springs out of that culture, which could be really cool. So I hope they do it. But, you know, there's so much to be said here. The Three Wise Men character was important because you have to see that this shit starts at the top. The corruption, the coercion, the whole culture of the police force starts with these high-ranking police officials and runs down to guys like the Alonzo character, like Denzel's character. And the whole culture is centered around corruption into, you know, the take, stealing, you know, taking things that aren't theirs, misusing your authority, misusing your power, all of that kind of stuff, which is really a very it's a great part of setting the tone for this world and how it works. That Alonzo has to go and pay $40,000 for a warrant, for an arrest warrant, and that's the way the Hoyt character says it can't be like this. You know what I mean? He physically says it can't be like this, and Alonzo's like, "This is it, kid. Like, this is the way it works." Now, is that the way it works in the sort of the world of the film? Is that the way it works proper? Or is that the way it works for this particular squad and on this particular team? But it's such an interesting thing because it is meaningful in real life, not only of the the early to mid 90s in the United States with the racial tension and all the alleged shit that was going on in the various police forces in New York and LA and all these other big cities, but also that it's relevant to today and what's happened in the last couple of years here in these United States, which is meaningful, that maybe a lot hasn't changed. Yeah. Maybe there is a lot of endemic shit going on that's just hard to root out, and all those conversations. But and I love setting it in that world, and I think this is really a frightening movie. I think one scene in particular in this film is probably one of the scariest scenes I can remember in any movie. And also, this movie, I could rarely recall a film that takes on such different meaning after the first time you see it. Because again, the first time you see it, you're holding out hope. Maybe it's really not like this. Maybe this young kid is being pulled along to be part of this force who has to basically, they have to operate the way they operate in order to combat evil. It's like fighting fire with fire. It's like becoming one of them in order to gain the upper hand, that we have to kind of lower ourselves, demean ourselves in order to basically do battle with this, this contingent of drugs and violence and all that kind of stuff. But then you find out it's really not. It's really a horror story about this young kid being pulled into this whole situation that was put together in order for this character to get out of trouble. I mean, this whole thing was a plan built from A to Z, from scratch, because this character beat the crap out of a Russian mafia guy in Vegas, ran afoul, thereby running afoul of the Russian mafia, and has a bounty on his head and has to come up with $1 million in order to get, or be murdered. And this whole plan was put together by him, including pulling this young kid into this whole scheme in order to get out of trouble. And when you get to the end of the movie and you realize that, you're like, holy shit. I mean, it's the heart of darkness, man. I mean, it doesn't get any more evil than that. The first time you're watching, though, you're really hoping that, what is happening isn't really happening. You really are the audience proxy for the Jake Hoyt character in this. Yeah, which I never realized. I probably saw this movie 4 or 5 times. I never really realized that. And it makes it a very strong, powerful message and a strong, powerful movie.
I wish it's a film almost you could remove and from your mind and see again, because you can't. It's like The Sixth Sense, where you can only see it the first time once. I mean, obviously that's true with everything, but it is just a fundamentally different project after that. And yeah, I also feel like the writing is very clever, and I don't think it's clever by half. I think it's pretty clever writing. Like everything seems to be relevant. I actually feel like there's a lot of Mad Men-esque symbolism in it as well. We always talk about, and we did our Mad Men episode. We'll do it better in the future, but many of them, I'm sure. But Mad Men is obsessed with putting things into scenes like what book is on the nightstand. Details. And all that. Like, they do that shit intentionally. And I feel like, especially in the last season of Mad Men, it's everywhere. It's awesome. I won't even say what you think is going to happen at the end. Although I think we all thought what was going to happen.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Although it didn't end up going that way. But nope. I feel like there's a lot of that in this film. And some of them are small and some of them are big. Like when you go to the diner in the beginning, when Hoyt and Alonzo meet each other for the first time, he's reading the stock page. He keeps telling him like he wants to read his paper and all that, but he's not reading anything. He's looking at numbers. Like he's just fucking with them, right? And there's other symbolism. I don't know if you've noticed this. I could be reading into this too much, but Denzel wears 2 crosses. And one of the crosses goes away at some point, and then he replaces it at some point with a badge. And I feel like that's symbolism, right? Like, I am God, or this is the same. I'm wearing a crucifix, I'm wearing a cross, some sort of holiness, some sort of above it all or whatever. And I don't know if I didn't rewind to look, but Ethan Hawke at some point starts wearing a cross. Was he wearing it the whole time? Because you only notice it at the end.
Yeah, like, that's true. That's true. I think he is. And there's a nice contrast there because he's wearing black. I love the whole God thing. You know, he's wearing that giant crucifix, but he's also wearing black. So it's like not this magnanimous God. It's like a vengeful God type of thing. But certainly a godlike. I mean, this guy runs completely unchecked, you know, throughout the streets. I mean, where is this guy's handler? You know what I mean? It's like, does what he wants to do when he wants to do. I mean, he's completely, you know, he's got almost complete autonomy, a hand-picked team that does his bidding. I mean, it's pretty frightening. I mean, talk about abuse of power. It's I think one of the scariest things is a corrupt cop, you know, where you're given that power. You're a man, just like all the rest of us, but you're given that power, you're given that authority, and then you choose to abuse it, which is a choice, which is relatively easy thing to do. Yes, there's eternal affairs that are supposed to govern and check that. There's a culture of, you know, prison where you don't want to be a lawman or woman and go into prison, that type of thing. So there's some sort of, you know, there's the trappings of you don't want this, but it is easy to do. If you're smart enough, you can do it. And a lot of people choose to make that, you know, unfortunately, not a lot, but there is a portion of people associated with the law that choose to go in that direction. And I think that's just such a frightening thing. But yeah, man, I love the symbolism. I don't think you're reading too much into that at all. I think it's really thoughtful stuff. And they definitely put that in there. Purposefully.
What about, I'm curious what you think about, we were talking a little bit about the casting earlier. What did you think about the inclusion of Snoop Dogg and Dre? Because I had actually forgotten they were both in it until they popped up. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's quite immersion breaking for me, especially with Snoop, because he's still so relevant today. It's actually kind of incredible. I mean, he is just as relevant today as he was then, and just as relevant 10 years before that. Kind of amazing.
True.
And I know Dre was trying to do some acting at this time, I think. And I don't know. I don't know. I just found it kind of distracting and unnecessary, especially the Dre character, actually. But what did you think?
Yeah, I liked seeing Snoop in there. It's true what you say. I mean, it doesn't get much more iconic than Snoop. I mean, he's not, you know, it's so interesting to think about Snoop and starting out with Dr. Dre and being a hardcore hip hop dude in the early to mid 90s and, you know, basically coming along to being a household name. I mean, is there anybody you could go up to a random 80-year-old woman and there's a high percentage she's going to know who Snoop Dogg is. But I like seeing him in there because I think Snoop is actually a good actor. I think he actually does have some acting chops. I loved seeing him pop up in Trailer Park Boys, by the way, that whole arc with his character.
I haven't even seen that.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, dude, no. I won't even ruin it for you. It's amazing. And he's so good in that. And then, you know, he's doing the comedic thing in that too, which he's really good at. Very likable. You know, really, really a charismatic dude, I guess, in real life, and that transpires to the screen. But I loved seeing him in this. I thought he was really good. He was also had to do some physical stuff, which was impressive. Dre, on the other hand, now I love seeing Alonzo's sort of handpicked group of narcs that, you know, once you get to know that this character is such a fearsome dude and that he has a group behind him too, that, you know, is allegedly handpicked by him. And they, you know, think about a lot. He says there's 5. And I think what it was that Roger character eventually retired from, you know, active duty or whatever. So there's 4 of them now, 5 in total. And think about Alonzo times 5. I mean, that's a pretty frightening prospect. I loved seeing the group in there, but they have a very Knights of Ren-esque thing for me where it's like, can you explain a little bit of, like, give these guys a little more texture? And I think a lot of it is not helped by all of them. Maybe to a man are just not great actors. You know what I mean? Or not cast well, you know, but Dre is just I'm not saying he's a horrible actor, but back in 2001 or 2000 when this was filmed, he's pretty bad. He takes you out of the film, but I think if he was a serviceable actor, he wouldn't. I don't think it's who he is. I just think that he's not good at it, you know, and seeing him stand there in a scene with Denzel is almost, you know, it's pretty incriminating for Dre, but also kind of an insult to, you know, I mean, you got to stand with Denzel. I mean, this is one of the greatest actors that we have, you know, and then this is one of the worst performances I've ever seen. So it's not a good combination. You know what I mean?
It is funny. It's funny you say that though, because I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that is the most significant, I think, aspect of the acting, disparate acting in the movie. But I also feel like you could even say that about Denzel and Ethan Hawke. That's why I was so fascinated when I was like, what? Then Ethan Hawke was nominated for an Academy Award? Because everyone knows Denzel won an Academy Award for this role, and rightfully so. But I was like, what? They both went thinking that they might win. I think that's preposterous.
Yeah,
personally,
that's interesting. I mean,
yeah, I think that's totally preposterous. I think Ethan Hawke is serviceable. He's fine, but it wasn't very strong. And again, I just don't know if it's because of Denzel or if it's just Ethan Hawke himself. Because again, and if you look at the Gen X movies, I'm so glad you brought up 1989's Dead Poets Society. He's so good in that movie, and he's so good in Reality Bites and some of these other films as well. I just think he's not cast right in this, but yeah, it was surprising. We come across those every once in a while, these Academy Award nods, where it's like, what? Yeah, they're getting a little more mystifying now, but even back then they were becoming quite mystifying.
You always wonder about the I know that they were thinking about casting. There's a couple of that I read. Ryan Philippe was one. Oh, he was very much of that era, so I could see him being in there just for a little, you know, just for a little brand name association thing. And the other one was Mark Wahlberg, which I'm very polarized on Mark Wahlberg. Sometimes I think he's great, and sometimes I think he's not very good. So and maybe that's just because he's evolved as an actor, in all fairness, if I think of the timeline. But yeah, Ethan Hawke, I see what you're saying about Ethan Hawke, and I wonder how much of it is his performance and how much of it is just Ethan Hawke. I don't know. And I don't mean to demean Ethan Hawke. I really don't. But I wonder how much of it is just that he's not very likable. You know what I mean? Maybe he doesn't have a warmth. Maybe I think you're rooting for the character because you know he's up against this basically unstoppable steamroller of evil. You know, you would root for anybody in that position. But I wonder how much of it is that, or, you know, and I wonder how much of it is just, you know, who has the chops to stand with. I wonder if we could think of somebody that's Ethan Hawke-ish of that time that could stand with that Denzel performance. Maybe there is if we think hard enough, but that's a tough act to follow, man. I don't certainly, you know, I don't envy having to stand there with Denzel.
Yeah, he casts a mighty shadow. You have to imagine that must be nerve-wracking for any actor to stand in there. But we were talking a little bit, or I was talking a little bit about the writing, and I'm wondering if you think it's too convenient. I actually really like the writing and how fast and kinetic everything is. But how everything is so intimately connected to each other that I know that some people feel like it's a little too clever. I like it. I think it's cool. Like, he goes and shakes up these guys from college. They might go to UCLA or something, or USC, probably USC, buying weed, you know, in their very telltale late 90s, early 2000s Beatle Redux.
Yes.
And it's interesting, like, he steals the weed in the pipe. Then he puts dust in the pipe. Then he has Ethan smoke it, thinking he's smoking weed, but he's on dust. That is designed to put the dust in his system. You know, all this it's very manipulative. And like you said, even with the going to Sandman, which is basically just a distraction, a MacGuffin, really. And they go to Sandman. That's where you see Macy Gray's character, who is actually awesome. That character's fucking really well done. And so we'll talk about her in a minute. But then they go in with no warrant. They're doing this in order to steal money. The money goes so that they can get the warrant from the crooked judge, so that they can go serve it to Roger, so they can dig the money up. They lie to Roger and say he's being taxed. Then they murder Roger. They pin it on Ethan's character. Then it's the one thing about the neatness of it is like, how did you do this so quickly? And who is in on it? Like, is he the only one that knows the end game? Presumably so. But I like the one line, I think one of the three wise men say, like, the Russians don't care if you've got a badge. So you know that they're dealing with someone that doesn't respect them at all. They don't care. The Russian mob doesn't care, just like MS-13 and others don't care. So did you think the writing was a little too convenient, or did you kind of like the way everything looped in? Even the wallet, which I think is awesome. I actually think that is one super cool, although very mystifying coincidence. And I like how even the guys recognize it and are like, crazy, man. You know, like,
yeah.
But I like that. I think
Yes.
I think that's really neat. And I'm curious what you think about that whole sequence.
You know, it's so that well, I want to get to that sequence. Overarching, I don't think that it's too clever. I think that it shows that the Alonzo character is a master manipulator. I mean, this guy is not, you know, he is obviously an LAPD detective, highly decorated, highly regarded, legendary status. He's also a criminal mastermind. The fact that he orchestrated this entire thing to get himself saved from the Russians. And it's orchestrated by him. And I love what you said. Like, there's probably even his crew has limited knowledge. His 4 guys, his 4 closest associates, probably even have very limited knowledge of the overarching bullet points of his scheme. They probably know what they're probably on an extreme need to know basis, even those guys. This guy operates completely by himself, for himself. And so I think that's where, if you're looking at it from a spectator point of view or a viewer point of view, I think that it's not too clever. It's just that Alonzo put this entire thing together from start to finish in order to incriminate and murder this young cop, get himself the money and get himself out of trouble with the Russian mob, which, you know, was completely his fuck up. And it's what really interests me about it is the fact that there's a couple of things. The fact that the high-ranking LAPD police officials and the Roger character know about this. They know, you know, whatever information they have because of who they are, the wire, whatever. They know that this happened with the Alonzo character, that he went to Vegas, he fucked up, he accidentally ran afoul of the Russians, and they know about it. That's interesting to me. And the other thing that's interesting is the fact that there's so many people in on it that Alonzo would be incriminating, whether it's the Mexican gang, the 3 wise men, the Roger character, his own 4 guys that he employs, LAPD in general, of course, Jake's family, everybody. These kids, these suburban kids that come into South Central to buy drugs. All of these people are pulled into this radius of this madman, basically, all with the plan to get this $1 million to get himself off the hook. So that's, I mean, it's such an insidious plan that, you know, and you realize this guy is not only seasoned, he's not only running the streets, but he's extremely intelligent to be putting something like this together. I love the bit with the wallet, though. That's the one, and thank God it happens, because I think when Alonzo brings Jake into that neighborhood, into that, you don't know that it's I don't know if that, you know, it's a Mexican. You could essentially,
it's like Echo Park, I think, or something, right? Something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. You know, which is
where Ramon lives.
Who lives there?
Ramon lives
Oh,
there.
he's over there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I've ever been to that specific neighborhood, but there's so many interesting neighborhoods. I think the same way of Compton and other Los Angeles area neighborhoods that have such an iconic look to them. That look, we might have talked about this on another episode of the show, but they don't look like anywhere else in the world or even in the United States. Just really looks unto itself. Has such a look and feel with the light, with the architecture and all that kind of stuff. I'm really interested in it, actually, and also because California is one of the newest places in this country. You know, in a very new country compared to a lot of other places in the world. So that's very interesting to me too. But that's kind of a whole nother conversation. I think when he gets holed up, when Jake gets brought to that house and he realizes Alonzo brought him there to stay there, that he's not going to be escaping this place. That's a very frightening scene for me. And thank God he has that wallet, which is his passport out of being murdered by these guys. You know, we know Alonzo, you know, these guys notoriously, probably because they are involved in drugs and gangs and all that kind of stuff, already have an inbred distaste for cops. That's number one. Second, you know, Alonzo paid them to take care of Jake.
Yeah,
and
they even say get that bathtub get that bathtub clean or something. He says something to them earlier on the phone.
It's so scary. And also when you think about the neighborhood, it's packed with people from the sidewalk on up. How many people are between Jake and that front door of that place? You know what I mean? You see the girls, you see the vatos or the gang members outside on the front porch in the hallway. Like, besides the 3 killers in the kitchen, who are all, by the way, very obviously it's Tuco from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, but also all 3 of them are great actors. And that really, you put yourself in Jake's position there, and it's so frightening. Thank God he helped that girl earlier, who happens to be the little cousin of one of the gang members. And, you know, his passport out of trouble. I love that little bit where he thinks to pick up the wallet. Also very telling about Alonzo's character, that Alonzo comes through, lets Jake get beat within an inch of his life. I mean, who knows how that could have went? Jake ends up using illegal chokeholds and moves that are really not sanctioned by the police, by the police department, we know, and he gets himself out of trouble while Alonzo watches. And then Jake's the one who thinks to pick up the wallet. Alonzo's not interested in any of it. You know, he's interested. We know ultimately that he's interested in getting himself off the hook with the Russians. That's really his goal that day. But you know, he didn't even see the girl getting raped in the alley. He wasn't even paying attention to it. So you know, it's so tragic that this Jake character, who knows what goes on to happen now? Is he going to stick with the police force? Is he going to persevere? Is he going to try to be a good cop? You know, what's going to happen? But this guy, you're basically taking this guy out of circulation by what he dealt with this day. And that makes it, you know, it's pretty harrowing.
What do you make of, because I wrote this down, I thought this was a little strange. I wasn't crazy. I mean, I know it's a place and time thing, but Alonzo's car is ridiculous. And one of the things that really bothered me the most about it was when they get their windows shot out. And then they just drive through the rest of the day, including to the meeting with the 3 wise men and doing the other things. And I'm like, this is weird. This doesn't make any sense. Like, this is that was one immersion breaking thing. Like, you're going to roll up to these guys' lunch in some exclusive club and incriminate them with a car that is riddled with bullet holes. That doesn't even make any sense. That was the one thing where I feel like you needed to write around this in some way. You know, maybe you lose the whole back window or something, so there's not 3 holes in it. So there was little things like that bothered me. Even the scene with Denzel when he forces Hoyt to smoke the dust, he's doing it in the middle of an intersection. People are just beeping at him and stuff, and he's drawing his gun on them. There's little things like that where actually, it's pretty funny. Hoyt at one point says, I'm going to be on the 6 o'clock news or something. And I'm like, it's so funny that that's your major concern. If this happened today, you would be on social media from 17 different angles in 2 seconds after that gunfight. People would be taking pictures of your car with bullet holes going down the 5. Like, there's just a million. So that was a little immersion breaking for me. I know it's not that wasn't the era of the cell phones obviously are in it, but smartphones and all of that. I feel like very similar to what we talk about with film, horror film, where the movies either have to be older or set in like it's like why Midsummer works or why The Game Until Dawn works, because they're set in the middle of nowhere, so you can't use your phone and there's no internet access. You kind of have to like write around those things today. Back then they had fewer things to write about, but I still feel like it's a little weird, right? It's like you're driving this ridiculous Monte Carlo with all the trappings, and you're just pulling out your gun on random people and holding people up and stealing shit from people. I understand that's the entire point of the movie, but it just seems like, does anyone give a shit outside of what we're seeing that this is happening? Because I lived in Los Angeles and a lot of things are weird there, no doubt, but I would notice if there was a car riddled with bullets driving down, especially if it was a beautiful Monte Carlo driven by 2 cops. I'd probably notice that. So what do you think of that? Does that resonate with you at all?
Absolutely. I mean, that's totally one way of looking at it. Do you remember that 1979 Monte Carlo, especially in black? That could have been the only color that car came in. Such an iconic vehicle. Do you remember Uncle Mike had that car? Probably a couple of model years later. Uncle Mike always had hot cars, but Uncle Mike had that exact car.
He loves American cars.
Oh, I love his model too. Uncle Mike will get a car, have it for 2 years. He usually leases, if I'm not mistaken. And then he'll lease it for 2 years and then just get another one. And he has like he has his cars on 2-year circulation. I always tell Helene, like, that's what I want to do. And she's like, that's ridiculous. I'm like, no, that's amazing because it's the perfect plan because you never have to service the car ever. You're getting rid of it at like 15,000 miles. You get the next one. You never do anything except change the oil. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he loves his Cadillacs.
Yeah, he's very much into Chevy, very much an American-made dude, especially with the cars. But yeah, Uncle Mike had that car, but it wasn't pimped out. It didn't have the hydraulics and all of that.
Yeah, he didn't have Uncle Mike wasn't driving.
That would have been amazing, especially the 80s before that was even like a thing. But it was like a thing for funny cars, and that was it. But the way you read it is certainly one way of reading it, Kyle. The way I read that is, and it's a little cartoony, it's a little exaggerated, but I go in for that, is that this guy is completely above the law. He, again, talk about operating with autonomy. He's the man. Who's going to tell him no? And even when he goes to visit, it's funny that he has the bullet-riddled car. He drives into the exclusive restaurant to meet the wise men and everything. And, he's getting it valet parked and everything. Now, the wise men are guys that, being these highly decorated, high up the totem pole police, officials, they're the guys who could probably, that do sort of hold the leash, but they let him operate the way he operates because he greases the wheels. You know what I mean? He puts the $40,000 in the trunk. And by the way, there's some really cool details with the wise man too, who speaks to the corruption of this whole system and why they're doing it. They pull up to the parking lot of that restaurant. It's Mercedes and Jaguars and Bentleys and all that kind of stuff. But if you pay close attention and cars, those aren't ones that you're getting off the showroom floor. Those are waitlist cars. That's like a CL55 AMG. Those are cars you have to wait for like 2 years for. And, so it's cool that even that level of detail, these aren't 85,000 Mercedes-Benz. These are $250,000 cars, $300,000 cars. And they talk about the exclusivity and the lifestyle. They're smoking the expensive cigars and drinking the expensive bottles of wine and scotch and talking about their boats and their mistresses and all that kind of stuff. This is what, you could read into the whole system of, this is what Alonzo Harris does for these guys. He basically is the one responsible for the lifestyles they're able to lead. So even the handlers are letting him operate the way he operates. He rolls around in this Monte Carlo. He looks like a gangster, and not only does he operate like a thug, he is essentially a street guy. So that's the way I read into all that. Like, this guy it's so scary. Even the very early scene with the luncheonette walking across the street, he just walks across traffic. Like no one's, like holier than thou. You know what I mean? He walks across traffic. He stops in the middle of that intersection. He gives zero fucks about anything and can get away with anything because of who he is. And, he wears that like a badge of honor. It's really, if you think about a corrupt cop in real life, taken to the nth degree of what that could be and how they could operate, like completely untouchable. And I think it's funny when you really think about it from a real life perspective, but in the movie, it's scary. Actually, no one's going to stop this guy. I mean, he really, King Kong really doesn't have shit on him. He really doesn't.
No, definitely not. I feel like it was funny too. The one confusing thing, and again, I think maybe people would have different insight into this. I was a little hung up on the marijuana thing because he's throwing it around, like he's talking about marijuana in this very exotic way in this aluminum foil, and then he hands it to Roger and they're sniffing it or whatever. And I'm like, it's not that exotic. Medical marijuana was legal in California at this point for 5 years. Everyone was smoking weed. That was a little lost on me. I mean, I've talked about medical marijuana, and in California, it's a joke. Anyone can get a medical marijuana card. I got a medical marijuana card for nothing. So I was a little confused by that, about these guys from USC or UCLA going to buy weed on the street. I mean, I bought a lot of weed in my life, and mostly illicitly, right? Over when I was younger, when it was illegal in places I was in. And I never went to a situation. I don't know that many people have smoked more weed than me. And I don't know. And I never was, you know what I mean? Like, so just little things like that. It's like, I never went and bought like an aluminum. Who puts a dime in an aluminum thing and you buy it on the street? Like, I've never. It's marijuana, it's not crack.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a little strange, but that was a little bit of a hang up. I did like, though, the drug stop with them. They were playing Papa Roach's Last Resort, which was another song of the time. Cut my life into pieces.
Oh yeah, that's right.
This is my last resort. Yeah, I love that song. I love that record actually, but good rap rock record. But they're playing that, and I wanted to segue that into the soundtrack. What did you think of the soundtrack? There's a lot of people on here that you like. I'm looking at. I mean, Gangstar is on here, and I Like Clips is on here. Cypress Hill's in there.
Yeah.
Trick Daddy. Pharoah Monch, Nelly, DJ Quick, and obviously Dre, and we hear still DRE and others. Rock Superstar by Cypress Hill, which I love. That's the song that they're playing. That's a great version of that song, the rock version, when they're climbing up the stairs to the house in Echo Park.
Oh, right, that's right.
They're playing. That's a great song too. Great rap rock song. Did anything in the soundtrack stand out to you?
The soundtrack
very 2001 soundtrack. Very 2001.
It's very 2001. It feels very late 90s, early aughts, really takes you back, really a time machine. It's funny. I was very similar feel. I was rewatching The Wire. I've been rewatching The Wire. I'm in the second season. It's so good, dude. Very similar. Wire comes a little later, just a little later, but very similar. Bless you. Very similar thing where, really takes you back to that era, whether it's 10, 15 years, 20 years prior, really is a time machine back. It's interesting about the soundtrack in this movie because I don't feel like this movie dates itself negatively in too many ways. And the music, of course, doesn't date itself negatively, but the music is probably the one thing that is a reminder, serves as a reminder that, oh yeah, this movie's 20 years old now, which is really interesting because otherwise you wouldn't really think of that. Maybe with the exception of seeing the ages of the characters, like Eva Mendes looks particularly young. She's gorgeous, by the way. Every time she pops up in the movie, I'm like, how beautiful is this woman? Like she is like,
definitely. And
really, I feel like doesn't get a lot of shine, like doesn't get a lot of credit. Besides being a pretty good actress too, I think in a lot of things. I think a lot of times she's undercast. I think she's a better actress than people give her credit for. But yeah, the music, man, I mean, it's amazing. It really reminded me of my situation with The Wire right now, where it really, I love the fact that those songs are in there because it's such a reminder of the times.
Yeah, definitely. And she's married to Ryan Gosling now, which I am.
I always forgot about that.
But I do like with the soundtrack. I was reading about the soundtrack. I didn't have the soundtrack, obviously. I used to download songs at this point, so I had some of them. But I was looking. I thought it was really funny. It is a rap soundtrack, so the Last Resort Papa Roach song is not on the soundtrack, even though it's in the...
Oh, it's not on there.
Yeah, I was reading. It says other songs, 4 songs not present in the album, but present in the movie, and Rock Superstar and Last Resort, which are like the 2 rap rock songs, are not in it.
What's the Dr. Dre song when he fires up the hydraulics? He's like, "You in the office, baby." That whole thing.
Yeah, that's still DRE. That's from the not 1999, is it?
Could be.
2001 rather, which was released in 1999. Yeah.
Oh, dude, that's a goosebump moment for me. I know it's corny, but I just think it's such a great scene. It's punctured. You see the close up of the exhaust, and the music starts at the piano, that tinkling piano, and I'm like, oh shit! Like, talking about going back to the late 90s, early 2000s. So good.
Yeah. Just the California level, as opposed to the more East Coast stuff that we listen to. It has a very different production value in the 90s. You can hear it, that the instrumentation that Dre uses, or really more in Snoop's song, is very different if you listen to something like Biggie, right? Like they do sound really different. It's cool.
Yes.
I prefer East Coast because that's where we're from, and I think it is better. But that West Coast feel and some of those records from that era that represent that sound, 2001 being one of them, will never get old.
It doesn't get old, right? I mean, you got the Dre, Snoop, Eminem's in that camp, certainly, all produced by Dre. I mean, they really do have that, telltale sound. So different than East Coast rap. And then, you have the whole Dirty South contingent. You have NorCal. San Francisco has its own flavor too. Yeah, hip hop is like, God, but I mean, maybe was that the golden age? That was probably the golden age of rap music, hip hop music, right?
I would say so. I mean, probably 95 to 2000.
Yeah.
Was pretty good.
I agree. Yeah.
2001 maybe. I think there's a lot of good hip hop now. I mean, I'm really into Currency and all of that. Some of these newer, I mean, Currency's not very new, but the Stoned Immaculate, which is actually like 10 years old now, is probably my favorite hip hop album. So I wanted to go back and touch on the Macy Gray scene because I really love that scene. When it came on, I was like, oh yeah, this is very memorable. Macy Gray's performance as Sandman's whoever, woman or whatever, is awesome. She puts in a really great performance. Very iconic with the nails, smoking the cigarette with the long ash. It's getting shorter and shorter. I love when she's like, show me the warrant. Like that she has a very interesting intonation in the way she talks. She's skeptical, and then she kind of sounds the alarm. That's when the car gets all shot up. And I like especially how Alonzo's like, oh, he did steal the money from her, but he's even lying to Ethan at that point, and hands her like, the OBS or off track betting rather, sheet or whatever. So what did you think of that scene? I feel like that's a very memorable scene.
Oh, dude, it's so good. I'm really glad that you remembered to bring her performance up because she deserves to be mentioned. We talk about some bad actors in this or some bad casting, but she was amazing. And the thing I found out about the character, although it was a bit part, she's not in it long, is she put that whole thing together, including the look with the nails and the clothes and the gold cap on the teeth. And as you said, the, chain smoking, maybe acting like maybe high. She may be high. Felt very authentic to me. Felt really like an authentic bit of the movie where you talk about the movie getting a little exaggerated, maybe a little cartoony. She really grounds it. She feels like somebody you would really find in that neighborhood. And, it seems like a very authentic, genuine portrayal. And then you find out also like, she's got enough gall to razz the rookie cop. She's fucking with Ethan Hawke's character. And she's being, you're like, wow, this is kind of a scary place. You see the thugs, you see the gang members outside. Even the women in this neighborhood know how to stand their ground and hold their own. And then you find out, like, he's fucking with her. He's wronging her. He just stole tens of thousands of dollars from her house and serves her whatever, the betting thing or the Chinese menu or whatever was purported to be the search warrant, which he didn't really have. And we know why. We know search warrants cost a lot of money in this culture. He had to pay $40,000 for the arrest warrant for Roger. So, yeah, dude, that shouts out to Macy Gray for this. I don't even know that I knew she was an actress, besides being a brilliant musician, especially of this era. I think my old bosses in LA introduced me to her music, maybe it was her first or second album at the time. But yeah, dude, that's a really grounding bit of acting for me, is like that character just feels real.
Yeah, she's great. And I'm glad you brought up Los Angeles, and it's worth talking about again. You and I have both lived there, and so we understand it a little bit. I love the dissonance between LA is very bright, very rarely cloudy, very rarely rains. It's sunny and it's saturated and it's colorful. And it has the weird little heat effect in the air when you look through it. And there's a lot to it. It's very specific. The lighting's very specific. The palm trees are very specific. The topography is very specific. Do you appreciate, like I do, this might be a little bit of a leading question, but do you appreciate, like I do, the difference in heavy crime in Southern California and the bright and beautiful surroundings and how they conflict with each other? Because I even think about that when you see, there are examples of this not being true, but if you, like you brought up Compton before, if you go to Watts, there are parts of Compton and Watts, obviously, it doesn't look that bad. Like I think rundown New York or rundown Boston or certainly Detroit and other places, way worse. I always feel like California, especially in Southern California, and in my experience living there, does a better job of hiding what is really going on there because everyone is caught up in the trappings, even those of us that have lived there, of the almost paradise that you're around. It almost doesn't make sense. And I feel like Training Day does a really nice job of showing this, whether they do it in the Compton-like neighborhood they're in, which doesn't seem that bad, or they go to Echo Park, very Hispanic neighborhood, where it's not that bad, but it is that bad. And I feel like it only happens in Southern California that way. What do you think of that observation?
Oh, absolutely. It's crazy. I like that Los Angeles is so interesting visually that it is kind of important to show it during the day. Now, there have been filmmakers that do a really great job with LA at night. Think of Michael Mann with a movie like Heat. LA has a really distinctive look at night. Yeah. And all that kind of stuff. But I love seeing it during the day. And I love what you said, the way the light hits, the flavor of light, the palm trees, the architecture, the mission style roofs, the clay roofs, and the way that a neighborhood like Compton looks with the sort of Cape style houses all arranged just so, and maybe with a more Caribbean brand of color where a house could be pink. And you don't see that really on the East Coast. And the fact that Los Angeles, I have to be careful saying this, but seems a little more unapologetically neighborhoody to me, where there's a really clear distinction between neighborhoods. If you think of Beverly Hills to Santa Monica to Venice to everything along the PCH to a place like Brentwood or a place like Compton or a place like Inglewood, like everything seems very, I don't want to say divided by railroad tracks-esque, but a little bit. Like every neighborhood has a distinction, where the East Coast seems to have that too, but the East Coast seems to try to artificially, distill that a little bit, where it's not so delineated. Now, we grew up in a very distinctive, where there was very distinctive neighborhoods, and the dividing line in Bellport, for instance, was the railroad tracks, where you had the division between North Bellport and South Bellport, where there was a very clear distinction between, socioeconomically, with the size of the houses and the style of houses and the houses on the water versus the houses that were a little more inland.
And the ethnicity of the people that lived in these places. I mean, we can't ignore that either.
No, that's a huge part of it.
Condition. A lot of black people in because we grew up in a very black and white place, Bellport,
sure.
But a lot of the black people lived on one part of the town, and a lot of the white people lived on the other part.
Absolutely.
And so very, very, I mean, not always like that, but very interesting. I don't think we had, because I was saying this to Dad, actually. My neighborhood now, I live in a nice, I would call it an upper middle class neighborhood,
sure.
Brand new. So very similar to your neighborhood. And it's the most diverse neighborhood I've ever lived in my life, easily.
I love that.
When I lived in Santa Monica, it's very white. San Francisco, I was like the only white dude in a Chinese neighborhood, basically. Boston, very white. Long Island, black and white. But here, I was almost fascinated. I'm like, this is a pretty high socioeconomic place. And it really goes to show you how much times are changing and how nice it is that everything's mixing up. Because like my neighbor is black. The guy next to him is black. The guy next to him is black. The guy next to him is, they're actually women. They're Muslims. Across from them, across from me, like catty corner or whatever, like Hispanic family and stuff. It's kind of nice because it shows that these old socioeconomic expectations, at least here, are starting to break down, which is cool. And so it becomes less about who you are and more about what you do or whatever you're as a human. And so I really dig that. And it's a kind of an aside. I digress, but it is something that I've noticed where I'm like, wow, maybe the most expensive place I've ever lived is the most diverse.
I think that's really cool. And I would argue, I don't know about this. This is more of a gut thing for me, but just in observing where you live, the Richmond area, because our family's been down there for a couple of decades now. I think the northernmost parts of the South of the United States are going to be really important, along the East Coast at least, are going to be really important for that kind of breakdown in the socioeconomic divide. And I'm hoping what happens is that's a push north, because as it goes, that pushes north, because where I live in Pennsylvania isn't like that enough for me yet in the suburbs. And I'd like to see that happen more. It's just not like that enough here yet. And I hope that it's a couple of 100 miles north of where you are. And I hope that push continues upward now. It's a little more expensive to live here, but I also think that line is sort of getting washed out, where it's getting a little more expensive to live. At least it seems to be balancing out a little bit. So I love hearing that about places like Richmond, because I think what's going to happen is those are going to be the really most impactful places. Those are going to be the places that that are the most social liberal places, and that push comes up north, which is the reverse traditionally from the United States, how the United States has been. And I think that's really cool. I think that's a really cool reversal. And that, the fact that maybe, the North could learn something from what's going on a little further south, which is, which could be really, I like seeing that personally, because I'm a big champion of the suburbs. I really like living in the suburbs, but that's one thing I would like to see more is a little more blending going on out here.
Yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice because I can't believe, I don't know. It wasn't that long ago when I did it, but man, why would anyone want to live in a city anymore? I just don't. Now that I'm out, it's like, holy God, what was I doing? For years, what was I doing here? Spending thousands of dollars a month in rent?
Can you imagine?
I don't have to imagine because I did it You know,
and you were talking about moving to Brooklyn.
$3,000 a month. What?
You were talking about moving to Brooklyn, right? I mean, up to a couple of years ago, you were entertaining that. So it's like,
because there is this notion that renting, you know, if you do well economically, which, you know, I'm very blessed that like you are, like, do you really need to buy something? And like, because some people are saying like, you know, it's an investment, and it's like, well, if you don't have to worry about the investment, then what's the point of living in one place? But
right,
I don't feel that way anymore. That's not an argument I would make. Dig, there are a couple other things I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
I wrote this in my notes. I don't know if this played out to you too, but I felt like one of the funny things I kind of tuned in with Denzel is like I wrote down, it was almost like a Willy Wonka type thing going on where it was constantly like when he would get caught or in a weird situation, he'd be like, it would basically be like, you won, you know, like it's you, you know, like it would happen like 6 times in the movie where it's like, oh, you know, like when he's smoking and he's doing all these things, or he figures this thing out or whatever. It's like got a Willy Wonka kind of quality to it, doesn't it?
It totally does. It
totally like at the end of Willy Wonka when Charlie, like he turns Charlie around and he's like, you won. I always feel like that was what Denzel was doing every time. Like, you know, because Hoyt could have gone off the reservation a few times. He had his way. In fact, I wrote down in my notes, like there are certain times where Hoyt could have gotten away. Yeah. I wonder what would have happened. But like, you know, he pulls over and has him get out in LA and all this kind of stuff. Like there's a million ways out, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought
dude, it's so funny. Like, you know, Jake is savvy enough to get out of those situations in a few different, you know, instances that are one after the other. But every time Jake gets out of a situation where Alonzo thinks he's got the drop on Jake and Jake gets out of it, he's like, all right, you made it out of that test. It's like, all right, how many times do you think this guy's going to fall for that? It also strings us along as an audience. Cause again, that first time watching, you're like, all right, maybe he really is testing Jake. Maybe he really is sort of vetting his moxie and his steel and everything like that. But you know, eventually even as an audience, we realize like, all right, Jake, you didn't like at the end, when Jake gets the final drop on him in the bedroom where Alonzo's with Sarah and she's naked on the bed and he's putting the money together to go meet the Russians and he's clapping the clusters of dollar bills together. He's all right, you made it out of that test. It's like, it keeps happening. It is very cartoony where it keeps happening. It's almost like we talk about when we used to play action figures.
Right, exactly. That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
Where it's like, you just keep tacking on endings.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally ridiculous. By the way, I do want to say that I think this movie deals with, not that there's a lot of sexuality in it, but it deals with it exactly the way I need to deal with it. Like we didn't need to see Denzel, you know, railing Sarah, which clearly happened when they were there first, right? And then we don't need to see it again when she's naked in the bed. Like we get it. So I appreciate that. Also doesn't show a lot of violence either. I mean, we see someone get shot with a shotgun in the chest, but that wasn't too vivid. And then of course the gunfight in the kitchen. But for a movie so sordid, it does a nice job in my mind of showing us what matters. I think it all goes back into the pacing, which people have been harping on in our letters on Patreon, of course. So we brought that up earlier. Another thing I wanted to ask you, Dave, is just what do you think happened afterwards? I mean, there are a lot of questions to answer, and we don't know. I mean, we see Hoyt go home, but there's also other questions like for instance, Alonzo's guys, like they all got their money and bounced. I mean, as far as everyone knows, the story with Roger is what it is. Like there's a lot of unanswered questions apart from what happened here. But then you think Alonzo being riddled with Russian bullets in the middle of an intersection. And that seems a little crazy too, although it shows that the Russians really don't care because they literally just stand there and like do not care. Yeah. There's always a little something foreboding about the Russian mob. Scary. Definitely scary. I've been to a few Russian mob. Well, the Russian mob, I mean, used to control the strip joints in Suffolk County on Long Island. And so we've gone to a couple of those for like parties. Remember my bachelor party? Well, that was one, but I've been to others too, where it's like, these are Russian mob places for sure. Yeah, dude. Oh yeah. Unmistakably. Sure. Of course. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting, but what do you think happened? Like, what do you think happens to everyone? It's a great question. I mean, now we know Alonzo is obviously killed. Jake gets the money. He says he wants to use it as evidence. Now, is Jake going to bring down the entire structure, starting from the 3 wise men down? Not only talking about Alonzo's small squad of 4, but, you know, is it going to basically dismantle all this corruption in the LAPD? Is it endemic? Is it just completely invincible?
the biggest one for me, though, is Jake going to stay on the job? Is the sort of nature of the police force going to change basically by bringing down and exposing this corruption where a cop like Jake could function? Is he completely sort of disillusioned at the end and decide not to go in for this job that he once dreamed about? Is he going to change it? Is this the beginning of Jake changing it from the inside? Is he going to become the powerful cop and a force for good? There's so many question marks about it. And there was a lot of interesting endings that I read about that they filmed that I would have loved to seen. Like, there was one ending with a couple of the wise men waiting for Jake at the end where they were concerned about the money, but they didn't take it from him. In other words,
interesting.
So, and I would have loved to see more of the wise men because I think they're fascinating characters. And there was another ending where you find out that Alonzo wanted to kill, this is an interesting one, wanted to kill Jake by burning him alive in front of his wife and daughter. So getting extremely, maybe unnecessarily dark even for Alonzo Harris.
Yeah, that's weird.
But, a lot, and also an ending where I think Antoine Fuqua was sort of initially planning was where Alonzo lives and basically succeeds, where allegedly, Denzel stepped in and said, no, this character needs to have his comeuppance, and had enough of a strong voice in the whole thing. Of course, it's Denzel, where they basically rewrote the thing.
I would have loved that.
Where he does get
that would have been even better if he got away with it.
I think so.
That would have been awesome.
In
if
this
everyone
society,
and then it's just Hoyt just being like, at the end, Hoyt is just like,
the whole thing was he survived. But he had to go through that whole harrowing experience, and it was all for nothing. This corruption is just so woven into the fabric of this entire police force that it's inevitable.
You know what? I'm really a believer, as you know, in not doing sequels if necessary and all of that. But there's a potential. Not anymore because they're too old. But there was a potential for an immediate sequel to this, even with the ending that we got.
Yeah,
like. Because, and I was thinking about it, like, it could have been called like Judgment Day or something. Like, you could have called it something else where it's like now Hoyt tries to take all these dudes down or whatever, like the whole operation. I don't think it's really necessary, but my mind did go there where I was like, there was maybe a little more to tell here, because I know that they did the aborted TV series, and now, like you said, they're going to work on this prequel and all that. I'm like, I feel like Training Day I feel like you lost your opportunity. I don't really care about Training Day anymore like that. But I feel like if you, in 2002, got Ethan Hawke back, and it was about him going after Alonzo's guys and after the three wise men or whatever, or maybe getting sucked into their world or something. Like it could have been, it could have been cool.
Yeah, he puts his own team together. You could see the anger from what happened fueling that, want for revenge. Maybe even like a darker need for revenge than was, that this character could have displayed certainly in the beginning of the film, where this whole thing kind of kicked up and started up some anger for him, where it's like he has to go in and exact some sort of vengeance now. And I love the fact that Ethan Hawke's character. I see what you're saying about him. I'm not a huge Ethan Hawke fan generally, but I love seeing this sort of starry-eyed, wide-eyed character full of wonder, full of hope in the beginning, juxtaposed to the Ethan Hawke that's just been through the ringer at the end with the dark circles around the eyes, obviously extreme, barely survived, extremely angry, extremely exhausted. I love seeing that A to Z comparison and everything that he's been put through. It's really, again, it's sad, but I think it speaks to what you're saying too. Like, it would have been interesting to have a movie centered around that Ethan Hawke, that ending Ethan Hawke, and what he could have, we know what he's capable of too. Alonzo's a smart dude. Not only was he street smart and skillful in the ways of, obviously combat and fighting and guns and all that kind of stuff, he was really kind of hard to get the drop on. And Jake really held his own and had, showed some sort of mettle beyond that sort of farm boy football player, military academy, whatever, military background, sort of good cop type thing, that he wasn't, he wasn't a mark. He showed that he wasn't a mark. He showed that he could hold his own even with the toughest cop in town. So it would have been cool to have something around that. I kind of like that. But, this prequel also, Jake obviously won't be involved in this, but this sort of Alonzo Harris prequel definitely piqued my interest of seeing Alonzo 10 years prior, maybe new to the force, maybe just getting on the force. And, I read allegedly that maybe it shows how he was brought along by his mentor and how he was introduced to this whole sort of system of, this endemic system of corruption. And I love what Antoine Fuqua says too, Kyle, about this, where he feels like it's too much to say. It's letting these guys off the hook by saying corruption. It's more fair to say that this was a sickness and that they were sick, not corrupt. And the fact that it's not hinged on one or two corrupt cops, that it's a corrupt system that is fueled by each one of these guys, that's kind of created by each one of these guys. It's a corrupt machine, and that they see the way they operate as a necessary evil for fighting these giant gangs and these, this overwhelming force of drugs and, things that stem from the Mexican cartels and this thing that's almost impossible to fight, that was the only way that they could hold their ground, or maybe even get a little bit of a, victory, or at least keep their heads above water. And that, that's cool. That speaks to an authenticity of like and again, like the best writing of a character not thinking of themselves as bad, like a Darth Vader, right? They don't think of themselves as evil. They think of themselves as fighting for what they want, their right. desires, or what they see, how they operate, how they see it fit.
It's interesting to think about, I guess, the restraint shown in not necessarily trying to approach this. Not that it was a huge box office hit, but certainly could have gotten more immediately. So I guess I appreciate the restraint shown there. But I know that we talked about the scene at the end, and we should jump into that more. Grant McNeil wrote in and said, one of my favorite and maybe my favorite Denzel performances. Lots to discuss, but I'll focus on the best. How great is the ship pushed in guy? Seeing him again as Tuco in Breaking Bad made me immediately revisit the scene, and it's just hilarious. I remember the intensity of the whole scene from my first viewing, but wow, does the madness of that character ever give a lasting impression. It is cool to go back and see Tuco in more auspicious times, I guess, but I feel like this scene is interesting because, I don't know, Hoyt is so dumb in this scene. Like, how do you not understand at this point what's happening? You think he's just bringing in blenders to these people and stereos, like, and they open the box and take the money out, and one guy can't count them and count the money and all that. It's funny, but like at that point he should have known, like, he's paying these guys to kill me, and now they're asking me for my gun, and now it's like, I don't know, it's very scary, but it's like, why do you keep going down this hole? When are you gonna emerge from it? So talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on that scene.
On the scene with the Mexicans, or the scene at
yeah. Well, the scene at the house.
Oh man, dude, it's really, again, one of the scariest scenes for me of any movie I could really readily think of, because you put yourself in that position. You're constantly in the entire film, again, audience proxy, right? You're putting yourself in Jake Hoyt's position throughout the movie. And what would I do in that situation? I would have hightailed it probably tried to hightail it out of there and got shot in the back because I'm such a coward. But it's interesting too to see, like, his sort of, to see Jake's toughness, that he's not easily rattled. That he's not stupid. He seems to be able to identify trouble, but he seems to think he could get himself out of it. And when he's playing poker with those Mexican gangsters in the kitchen, and there's so much about that scene. It's such a cloistered, claustrophobic space. They're in that tiny kitchen. The guys are so cool and calm and collected about everything. They're drinking beers. They're offering him a beer. They're playing cards. They're fucking with him. They're telling him about prison and getting your shit pushed in, and, calling him a pig to his face and asking to see his gun, and then showing him their guns. Like, the writing is on the wall for what's going on. Somebody said, I heard somewhere or read somewhere, that you could hear Alonzo pulling away at a certain point when they're in the kitchen. You could hear him driving off. So those little details. And when he's trapped there, and he's fucked, escalating all the way to the point of getting dragged to the bathtub with the shotgun, it's like, holy shit. Like, everything we were hoping wouldn't transpire has transpired. It's all come down to this moment. And it's really an unpleasant scene. Again, I think this movie is such an entertaining watch, especially the first time, and I think it's highly rewatchable, the action, the pacing, and everything. But it's very unpleasant in repeat rewatchings because you know where it's going, and it's hard to picture, it's hard to imagine yourself in that situation. I mean, can you imagine the horror? You're about to be killed by these guys that were just, it's not even a personal grudge. It's not even something you did wrong. You know, these guys were paid to kill you because you were a cop. I mean, that's pretty dire stuff. And yeah, every time I watch that scene, I get very flustered. I get very nervous, even though you know how it's going to work out. And that whole bit of good fortune with thank God, saving the young cousin's wallet. And the fact that that was enough for these hardened killers to let this guy now go. And, you know, a minute prior, they were about to blow his head off in the bathtub. And how quick that changes on a dime.
Yeah, that was one of the things I think it goes to show how stupid criminality generally is. There are very smart criminals, but where they're like, you know, you understand it's just business, right? And it's like, you sound like such a fucking idiot.
That's horrifying.
A minute ago, this guy was telling you how he had a daughter and you were like, don't be a pussy. And you were putting a shotgun to his head and you were going to kill him. These people are just so dumb. You obviously don't want to cross them and you don't want to be around them or involved with them, obviously, but they're fucking idiots.
It's crazy.
It's very strange. Like, criminals are often given credit for being stupid and they often are stupid. That's why they get caught. And then obviously there are very smart criminals, but that really stood out to me because you hear that a lot where it's like, it's just business. That's obviously like a classic line that you hear, you know, you understand. It's just, you hear that a lot in mob movies that we love and stuff, but it's fucking stupid.
It's hard to relate to, right? I mean, these people that seemingly have no area, right? They'll do anything. They'll commit atrocity. But the fact that even they have a code, that this guy helped a family member, so that was enough to let him off the hook, is really hard to relate to. It's like, it reminds me again, I take it back to The Wire because it's so fresh in my mind. I'm watching it now. It's like Omar, you know, he's a killer, but he operates under a code. He won't interfere with anybody who's not in the game. He won't personally attack or hurt or murder anybody who's not involved in the drug trade. That's his code. And, you know, he's got this Robin Hood-esque thing where he steals from the rich and gives to the poor, but he's still a killer. You know what I mean? But it's so hard to relate to that. It's so interesting, like, how nuanced a human being could be. You know, I think that's really what it comes down to. It's like, it's beyond even understanding for a guy like you or I, but there's other people out there, men and women, who would understand that, you know?
I just think, I've been thinking about this and it's like hard to put into words. There just are a lot of stupid people. There just are a lot of very stupid people in the world. And there's no doubt that we were exposed to that in the acting form, of course, in that scene. But the one thing I wanted to ask you to kind of wrap this up, if there's anything else you wanted to talk about, we could of course do that. But Jeffrey Leonard wrote into us on Patreon. And remember, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia.
Do it.
To submit your inquiries. He says, I remember watching this when I was younger and having my perceptions on the law enforcement challenge. How do you feel about the representation of law enforcement in this film? So I'm of two minds with this. I'm very pro-police. I am. I'm undoubtedly pro-police. I think that generally a cop has a very hard job. I think we ask way too much of them. I don't think they're properly trained to deal with many of the things that they're asked to deal with. And they can be killed at any time by unexpected situations. There are bad and crooked cops. We just saw that with Derek Chauvin in Minnesota, who's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, which is justice served. But for me, I look at policing as a necessary and important aspect of a free society. And obviously there's going to be crookedness within it, just like there's going to be crookedness in government generally. But it is an interesting challenge on what law enforcement is and how it plays by its own rules and all of that. And I think it's special because not only do we look at the film through the post-Rodney King lens of the early aughts, like we said, but we also look at it now in 2021 through the lens of the recent uprisings that have been happening around the country due to policing. So I'm wondering where you stand on this. You've had unpleasant experiences with cops. I have as well. I just try not, and obviously I've not had an unpleasant situation like getting shot by a cop or anything like that. So I'm not trying to say that's like that, but they're in my the cops live in my neighborhood. I've had very pleasant interactions with them. I personally, our stepdad was a cop. So it is personal in some way to me that police are generally good. And I'm wondering what you think of that statement and also what you think about how this movie portrays them.
Yeah, there's so much to be said there, man. We've been going through, especially in our country, in the U.S., we've been really going through these conversations over the last couple of years. It's something that seems perpetual, that's not going away. Every time something happens with a police officer, whether they're misusing their power or misusing their authority, something happens where, unnecessary beating or unnecessary force, besides feeling for the victim, I feel like when there's a lash out against the police as a whole, my heart goes out to the good cops. Now, I come from a background of one of my favorite people in the world. PJ, this is your mention, so celebrate, my friend.
Celebrate it.
Your dad, PJ's dad, New York City police detective in Queens, now retired. One of the people I love most in the world, one of my favorite people, is a cop. And he's one of the best people I know. He would never, ever misuse his authority, misuse his power. He was so even-keeled at his job and getting to know him and his stories over the years that I would marvel at it. He was just built for it. He just a good cop, and he made detective and he made inspector, and he was very successful and retired, highly regarded on the force and everything like that. And again, being close to somebody like that, who's like essentially like an uncle or a second father, it gives you a lot of context into police. And every time it happens, my heart goes out to good cops because, of course, just like anything else, there's good and bad in everything. That's just common sense. I don't really fancy myself as a particularly intelligent dude, but every time it comes down to matters, I say, let's just boil it down to common sense. There's good and bad animators. There's good and bad podcasters. There's good and bad firefighters, cops, doctors, everything, right? That exists in every profession. It's human. It's humanity that we're talking about at the center of the conversation. So, and I have had bad experiences with cops. And, interestingly enough and funnily enough, a lot of Gen Xers and millennials could speak to this. A lot of it was through skateboarding. Because skateboarding had this cyclical, unlawful sort of reputation over the years where a lot of times it was against the law to skateboard and dealing with, running from the cops, and just purely through skateboarding dealing with some good cops and bad cops, good experiences and bad experiences. So my experience was a microcosm of a larger picture. I think it's really important, not to soapbox this in any way, but I think it's very important there's going to be good and bad in the police force. This goes for everywhere. I'm speaking specifically in the U.S. I do think it's very important to vet your would-be cops starting from the big cities on down. So New York, L.A., Philly, Boston, Chicago, on down. I think that the places that serve the biggest contingents, that serve the biggest populations, should be started with. So the big cities, on down to the secondary cities and everything in the U.S., and really vet these people. I think paying them better on the whole. Some cops are well paid and some aren't. Interestingly enough, a lot of suburban cops are paid better than city cops. That's ridiculous to me. So I think a lot,
New York City cops, by the way, are horribly paid.
Notoriously horribly paid. Now, if you go out to Long Island, $50,000 and $60,000 and $70,000 pay differences for rookie cops. That's fucking ridiculous. When you're dealing about, I'm not saying there's no danger in the suburbs. The suburbs have all the inherent problems of a city, gangs,
MS-13 is all over Long Island.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. It's huge. But I think that's where we really have to start with cops, with the police force. But I think the prospect of entertainment weighing in on this is inevitable, and I think it's a big part of not only sort of coming down and speaking out on an issue through entertainment, which I think is important. I think people have to have that voice. I don't think we should I don't think we should muzzle that in any way. I think that should always be allowed. But I think inherently it's very scary because I think one of the scariest things are people misusing their power. Their position of authority. You could be talking about any position of authority, a boss anywhere, a high school principal, anything, but particularly with the cops, because the police are there to serve and protect, right? And when they're misusing their power or abusing their authority, it affects everybody. And even if it doesn't directly affect you, it affects it really infects and sort of it sort of gets everybody weighing in with perception, what we perceive of the police force, what we teach our kids, what we learn from each other. So it's a super important issue, and I think it's really got to start at the top. And I think this movie does a really good job of showing that. Now, this movie shows it on the grand scale. It shows it with a big police force in a big city. That's a city that's been struck with its share of problems. By the way, Colin, mentioned that earlier in the show. Like, the city of Los Angeles was saddled with a reputation of bad cops.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to reiterate for younger people or people that don't know, foreigners or whatever that listen to our show.
Sure.
The Los Angeles riots were like was serious. I mean, we lost control of an entire part of an American city for days. That's where like the rooftop Koreans are from, and all the the funny things that happen from that. But that's like where that all stems from.
Sure.
And a lot of violent, horrible shit happened because of criminality, but also because of the behavior of cops.
Exactly.
In LA.
And that was the first time our generations were dealing with that largely. Now, this had gone on in the 60s, especially with all the race problems in this country.
Yeah.
But that's the first time our generation.
Had
and it never seems to heal. And, you're talking about 30 years ago, and it's happening again. And there's such a big part of the conversation here where it's like, what do we really do about it? What really is the solution, or at least something we could do to make forward progress with it? And, it's a complicated thing, but I think we have to boil it down and just make it as base and easy as possible and just start at the beginning, and just really and hold the offenders responsible. I think that's a big part of it. And just sort of try to weed out the problem. It seems like an endemic thing, almost along the lines of school shootings and gun control, where it's like it's so complicated and nuanced. But that's for me. I think the movie does a good job, and for me, that's really where my heart always goes out to the victims, and then secondly, it goes out to like the good cops, because there are people on the ground trying to do a serviceable job at what they do. They take their job seriously. Colin said it. I mean, being a cop is one of the hardest jobs. It's complicated. It's dangerous. You're putting your life on the line every day. And I think if you're good at it, and you're taking no shorts, I think that's really putting yourself out there. But I guess also it has to come down to if it's something that you really want to do. As a person really want to do it, could they handle it? Like a Jake Hoyt. Are they able to do a job, put themselves on the line and handle it and not be stressed out and not abuse their power and have the capacity to deal with it the way they're supposed to deal with it, which is easier said than done, I'm sure, but
yeah, I think you're right. And my take with this is I really do feel like we just asked cops to do too much. I think that by removing police from certain situations, for instance, like what happened in Minnesota, not with George Floyd, but later with that she was like a 25-year veteran and she shot the guy in the chest or whatever, when that was clearly an accident. Because I hate when people are like, oh yeah, this 25-year veteran of the force just actually murdered this guy. Okay. No, that's not, she resigned. She is going to probably go away. It was very cleanly dealt with, but it brought up this topic that I had never really thought about. Like, why are we asking police officers to stop anyone anyway?
Right.
Like why are cops stopping people on the road? Unless like you're providing an imminent danger, right? But people even make the argument, like you see like a cop has a camera, right? And has all these different tools in his laptop and his accoutrements in his car. A car zooms by 100 miles an hour past him, right? He could chase him and run him down, but he probably has all the data he needs to just get him later at that point, right? And that's what people have been asking. It's like, unless the danger is imminent, you're called to a house, domestic violence is happening, right? That's different. But if like you're just driving down the road and you are putting tags into your laptop and someone has like an outstanding warrant, I'm like, I don't know that you should be stopping that person. I know that it's not that those people aren't doing anything wrong. The point is like, let's remove because you're saying like training starting from the top. I agree with that. My whole thing is like, let's just remove police interactions with people as much as possible so that they really don't happen.
That's interesting.
You know? Like they only happen when they need to happen. And the other thing that I've been reading about and hearing about, which I think is interesting, is like, and this is provocative, but I think interesting. It's like, why are the same police dealing with all of the issues, right? Like you might want to have a police, like if you live in a town and they have 100 police officers, you might want to say like, hey, why don't we have 2 or 3 cops that are social workers and they go on calls for domestic violence or they go on calls for suicides or whatever. And then you have like the big bulky guys. It's like we have a drug call or something's going on. So we have the guys that are a little more, they're ready to go. They're ready to rock, you know, and train different people to deal with different things and remove because policing in the United States has become kind of overt. We live in a very free society. There's no doubt, but the presence of police is everywhere. And I don't know, except for last year when everything kind of started going downhill, the United States is getting less and less and less violent every year. It only stopped in 2020 going in the other direction. So police presence might be doing that, but my theory is that people are just becoming more peaceful. And as I've said, I think on this show and certainly to others, I think crimes are becoming so difficult to get away with at this point that I think it's stopping people from doing anything. Like it's way harder to get away with a crime now than it was 20 years ago, just by virtue of you having a cell phone in your pocket and pinging different towers. Like there are all these different things you have to cover now and how smart you have to be to get away with things that I think it's just stopped people from doing anything. So I think this combination of things is just going to make us more peaceful. You just have to remove the error, like the possibility, the introduction of error. It's not to say no one should get pulled over. It's not to say that someone in George Floyd's position couldn't be killed accidentally. Of course that can happen, but you just want to remove those instances to lower the mathematical likelihood of conflict.
Right.
And then you just call the cops in when they're necessary. I have never been in a situation where I've needed a police officer. I'm very thankful for that. 36 years, you know, I've called the cops on others.
Right.
Not like anything crazy, but like I've been in Santa Monica, there's a broken window. I call at a store, I call the cops and just say like, you know, there's a broken window here.
Okay.
You know, and then they get really annoying. They're like, are you on the north side of the street or the south? I think I've told you this before. And I'm like, I don't fucking know. I'm doing you a favor and telling you that there's this window busted
I had a
out.
similar situation.
Here is the address.
That's funny. That's really
north side of the street. I don't know. What am I, a fucking compass? I have no idea. Well, let me take out my. We'll see what the cardinal directions say, and I'll let you know.
Probably.
Yeah, you'll probably see because it's also the address, which is also one of them. It's so annoying. But so that's my whole thing is, you know, just to kind of end on that is I think policing in the United States, we just need to ask less. We need to train more. We need to have more, but like think about like a class system in Final Fantasy. Like you need to have more different types of cops and cops that are specialized in doing certain things, and then just remove their ability to interact with others when necessary. I'm not trying to be an asshole, but there's pretty much never going to be a reason why a cop needs to deal with me. Unless like I'm in imminent danger, my house is burning down or I'm getting, you know, but generally speaking, you can just leave me alone. And I think that that's probably the case for almost everybody, actually. So,
I mean, you make a lot of great points, man.
Something to think about.
You make a lot of great points. It's, you know, inherently, you know what everything you said boils down to? Being able to trust the average Joe, the average citizen, right? If you don't, inherently laws are there to discourage you from doing something. Let's take speeding, right? The act of instilling a little fear of punishment is supposed to deter you from committing said crime. Driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour, you're going to get a $400 speeding ticket, right? Or God forbid, murder somebody. So you're getting pulled over by a cop is supposed to stop you from doing that for punishment, right? So can we trust people just not to speed? You know, people are late. People fuck up. They oversleep. They're late for work. They have to pick their kids up from an appointment, whatever it is. So it's such a nuanced conversation because limited interaction is kind of a cool theory. I kind of like that. But there's also an inherent fear of cops, which I don't think that helps. You know,
it feeds into each other. Everything feeds. Yeah,
it's cyclical almost.
Right,
but it is
it's
interesting.
A snake eating itself.
It is really interesting. What it really comes down to is the fact of can you just behave good behavior and a certain percentage of humanity just behaving well generally at any given time, which would would necessitate the minimal amount of policing,
Right.
But that also gets into, automation and computerization and needing less people for shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole socioeconomic.
It's so crazy, dude. Like red light cameras and drones and all of that. You could control, traffic violations on 95 with those things, but then you're not paying people, so.
Right. And there's also the argument, I think some states have already rendered this, that like red light cameras are illegal. Like,
yes.
Which is cool. I dig that too. But then it is a catch-22 about all these things. I think the major thing too is to also not judge all instances of police brutality in quotes as the same, right? And I think that's another thing that we kind of have to work past. Like what happened to George Floyd is different than what has happened to some other people. And I think a lot of those things are put together. Like there was that 13-year-old kid, and I don't know where, I was in Chicago or something, that got killed by a cop in the middle of the night because he was like wielding a gun, and then he ran away and the cop shot him or whatever. And I'm like, no, I don't shed any tears for you. Like, I'm sorry. You shouldn't be out at 4 a.m. at 13 years old shooting guns in the air. So right. Sorry. Bye. I mean, I'm not trying to be an asshole. You're not George Floyd getting murdered before everyone. You are an asshole and you got your comeuppance. It was going to happen. I mean, now or later, if that's what you're doing at 13 years old, you clearly have no parents, you have no guidance, you have no education, you have no care for anyone else. So I don't feel bad for you getting shot by the cops. I'm sorry. I just don't.
That's a whole different ball of wax.
Right. But then everyone takes these different things and puts them all together as one big instance of police brutality. And I think that is also the problem. And so we have to judge these situations as individuals and also understand when I think things don't appear as they are. I mean, even what happened in Ferguson back in 2014, I think it was, with, hands up, don't shoot. That never happened. And people still say that. That cop was not even charged with the murder of that dude because he came after him, and all the witnesses later said in grand juries and stuff. But the initial verbiage, the initial thoughts, they never go away, and the truth never comes out. And so that's why I think people need to. So like what happened to George Floyd is a complete travesty. He was murdered. I don't disagree with that.
It's ugly.
But again, that 13-year-old kid shooting guns in the air and shooting at traffic and then getting shot by a cop, I don't feel bad for him. And I think that we have to just separate those two things. They're different things.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's socioeconomic and it's all these different things too. Where was that kid's parents that was killed? Like why were you outside? Where'd you get a gun? Why are you called little homicide by your friends?
Wow. Is that right?
Yeah.
What?
So when I hear that you had a gun and then you threw the gun away and turned around and they shot you anyway, I'm like, I don't know, man. Sorry.
Yeah.
That sucks, but you didn't deserve to die, but you can see how that happens. And so there's a lot to say about policing in the United States.
It's dangerous to lump everything together. Exactly. It's also lazy.
Right.
It doesn't provide for thoughtful solutions.
Hate laziness. Hate it. I do. I hate it. It's like a more than anything in the world. I hate laziness. I hate lazy people and I hate laziness.
But that's what it is.
All right. Diggs, is there anything else to say before we go?
No, I'm just wondering. I'm so excited about Denzel coming out of this, of course. I wonder where we go from here, because we have one of my favorite Denzel vehicles, Man on Fire, which is like unbelievable. And of course, if you want to see Denzel under Antoine Fuqua again battling the Russian mob, we have the Equalizer movies, Dad's favorites. I don't think I've even seen all of 2 yet, although I've seen 1 a couple of times, Equalizer 1 a couple of times. So I wonder.
That's Dad's shit.
Oh my God, he loves it. He really does. I think the Equalizer movies in particular, right?
Just put in that what's that old white actor he loves?
From The Godfather?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's his name? Jesus, now it's going to elude me. Now you got to look it up.
Yeah, I'm just going to look it up. Or
Robert? No, that's not right.
Yeah, Robert Duvall.
Yeah.
You just put Robert Duvall in there with Denzel Washington, and Dad's going to...
Hey, I don't think those two have ever done anything together. I'm
going to look that up. Denzel Washington
and Robert Duvall.
Robert Duvall movie.
I'll tell you another underrated gem while you look that up.
John Q. They did John Q. I knew there was one.
Oh, he was in too. That's another one of Dad's favorites.
Yeah, I saw that in the theater.
Oh my God, Dad loves that movie.
Yeah, so there you go. That's a Denzel and
that's right,
Robert
and Duvall.
flick.
And that came right after Training Day in 2002, I think.
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed, it did.
And another one of my favorites, if you guys haven't seen, because I'm not sure this will ever be a knockback, Spike Lee's He Got Game. What year was that? 98, I want to say. And Denzel plays like an ex-con whose son is like a, going to be a star basketball player. And how he's like sort of initially like, again, kind of similar to the Alfonso Harris character, like kind of like that tough love dad type of thing where you don't know, suffers no fools, but you kind of, you could see somebody operating in service of just getting praise from this guy, working hard just to get praise from Denzel. So
he's an interesting cat, man, because I'm looking at his movie. He hasn't even done that much. Like when you really look at his filmography, it's like not much.
Not as much as you think.
He's been active since 81 and he's probably done 30 movies.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
And so that's pretty interesting. But I mean, there's some good ones on here. Obviously, Glory.
Oh.
But the bigger ones that he's in, like Malcolm X.
He is
awesome.
Malcolm X.
And the biography of Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X is just a must read if you haven't. The Pelican Brief and Philadelphia came out back to back. Those are awesome. Crimson Tide was in the mid 90s.
Love that movie.
So he's got, and like you said, He Got Game in 98, The Bone Collector, Remember the Titans, Training Day, John Q, Antoine Fisher, Man on Fire, Manchurian Candidate.
That's right.
It's like The Book of Eli.
Inside Man.
The Equalizer's on here. So it's a lot, dude. It's like, and it's pretty interesting to see his film. I have a big monitor, but his filmography fits on one screen with no scrolling.
That's not a lot. Pretty, and everything he makes, he's a grounding agent, man. Everything he's in is good. I mean, it's good even if the movie as a whole isn't good. He's good enough to warrant watching the movie. How many people can you say like? I wouldn't even put Robert De Niro in that category. Like he could be in bad stuff, and I think Denzel just makes it good.
He's great. Yeah, he's great. So there's other movies we'll definitely touch on some of these for sure. Yeah, Virtuosity's in here. There's a lot of interesting stuff. All right, Dig.
All right, my friend.
Let's end it with a dad joke.
All right, let's do it. I got one right here for you, Kyle. Actually, which one do I want to go with? I wasn't sure. I was really trying to think about which one you would laugh at. So I'm going to do the opposite one.
Yeah, save that one for later.
Kyle, I was just reminiscing about the beautiful herb garden I had when I was growing up. Good times.
It really should be good time.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, times is not.
Good time.
I think it should just be good time.
Yeah, good time would have been better.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, just good time.
Good time would have been better. Damn it. Joke website.
Fuck that one up. Stop fucking plagiarizing everyone and write your own jokes, and then you won't have to worry about reading these duds. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of our show, Knockback, and all other Last Stand Media shows, Sacred Symbols, and Defining Duke. We're getting pretty close as of the time we're recording this of getting our Let's Plays, getting past that goal on Last Stand Media. So go to patreon.com/Last Stand Media. Like more than 10,000 of you are there right now. Support us at whatever level you can. You get all sorts of different perks, early ad-free access to the show, the ability to submit your questions to our show, vote on topic ideas. Everyone just voted on Red Dead Redemption, which we'll do later.
Oh, I'm excited.
And so on and so forth. It's great.
I'm excited.
And thank God. Well, first of all, the second one wouldn't be eligible because it's not old enough, but the second one's so fucking long. It's good. It's awesome, but it's good. The first one is 15 hours or so. It's not a long game.
I'm going to start tomorrow night.
Cool, man.
I'm very excited
about that. I'm
guys vote for good things.
So. But thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support. We appreciate you again. And we'll see you next time for more Knockback. Until then, goodbye. Boom. I'm doing like that's like Pocahontas.
I'll do the other way. Yes.
Knockback, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. Knockback's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Knockback, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.